Hello, and welcome to part 1 of 2 of our threading video series, How to Thread Your Machine and Replace Spools. In this video, we will be discussing how to thread your machine from the very beginning, and how to thread your machine once it has already been threaded. Before we dive into how to thread your machine, let's go over some of the parts we'll be referencing: the back metal rack, the middle metal rack, the front metal rack, spool 1, which will be threaded through needle number 1, the top tension knobs, the bottom tension knobs, the spring lever, the machine head, and the presser foot. Now that we're familiar with what these parts look like, let's get started. To begin threading your machine, snap each thread spool onto the spool pins. The spool pins are the 15 pins secured with gray foam and a clear plastic reel. Do not get confused with the 3 pins on each of the far ends, which are for storing bobbin thread for easy reach when replacing your bobbin. As you insert your spools, be sure to place the thread colors you plan to use the most near each other. We recommend placing the spools next to one another on the first row. Keep in mind, your machine comes pre-threaded, so if you haven't already, unravel the threads from the top metal rack. The back row of threads will be threaded through the back metal rack. The middle row of threads will be threaded through the middle metal rack, and the front row of threads will be threaded through the front metal rack. In this video, we'll be discussing how to thread needle number 1. You'll be using spool number 1, which is located on the far right end of the front row of thread spools. In this instance, we are looking at the machine from the right side, so spool number 1 will be the first spool from the left. You will be able to find the spools that correspond with each needle by counting from the front to the back on each row. This is spool number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on, until you reach spool 15. Because your machine comes pre-threaded, we're going to first show you how to replace a spool before going into how to thread your machine from the very beginning. First, take the loose end of the existing thread and tie it to the loose end of the new thread in a simple knot. Once you have your knot on spool number 1, repeat the process on all 15 spools before proceeding. Now go to the front of your machine and unravel the thread that's wrapped to each of the wheels on both sides of the machine head. Once you unravel it, make sure the threads are separated and hanging individually. Next, grab the thread from the presser foot and pull each thread all the way through until you no longer see any of the old thread. While you pull the thread, you'll see the new thread and the knot you created traveling through the thread path. Continue to pull until you see the knot you created reaches past the needle bar. Now clip the thread right above the knot and repeat the process on all remaining needles. Once you have completed all 15, it's time to thread the needle. Pass the thread through the eye of the needle starting from the front to the back. Once you make sure your thread has gone through the needle, pass the thread down the presser foot. Now you can rest your thread on the spring. You should leave about 2 inches of thread hanging and trim the excess. Now we're going to go over how to thread your machine from the very beginning. First, we're going to pull on the thread from spool 1 and pass the thread through the vertical eyelet of the front metal rack. Next, pass the thread through the small eyelet located behind the first tension knob. Once completed, pass the thread to the right side of the top tensioner in between the tension discs, making sure the thread is inside the tab at the 3 o'clock position. Be sure not to leave the metal plates open. They should be touching after inserting the thread. Now remove the thread tension plastic tube. Then, using the included threading tool from your toolkit, hook the thread to the end of the tool and feed the thread through the plastic tube. Once the thread has been fed through the tube, unhook the thread. Next, snap one end of the thread tube to the metal thread rack and the other end to the machine's head. Then pull the head through the tube and lay it under the metal clip. After completing this step, raise the top disc of the tensioner toward you and slip the thread to the right side of the tensioner, keeping the thread inside the tab at the 3 o'clock position. Make sure the metal plates are touching and the thread is between the plates. For the next step, locate the post above the thread brake wheel, just below the number that indicates which needle you're on. To thread this section, you're going to pull the thread and place it on the left side of the post above the thread brake wheel. Next, guide the thread to the right side, and then under the thread brake wheel in a clockwise direction until you reach a full turn. The thread should now exit at the bottom of the thread brake wheel to the left side of the post. Now place the thread under the clip by lifting up the clip and snapping it back into place. Next, guide the head through the slit on the right side of the lever arm. As you do so, make sure the thread falls behind the gray cover as shown. Next, you will thread the check spring and lever arm. But before doing so, pull the spring lever down. This will make threading the check spring easier. Now, coming in from the right side, pass the thread over the outer right side of the rollers and then in through the opening in the center. Next, pass the thread through the spring from the right to the left. Then take the thread and pull it through the opening in the center, and pull it out over the outer left side of the rollers. Now pass the thread back in through the slit, and pull the thread through the opening of the lever arm, from the right to the left. Then pass it down through the same slit and through the first eyelet. Next, keep pulling the thread until you can pass it through the second eyelet, located behind the spring. Now that you've reached your needle, we're going to thread the needle like we did earlier in this video. First, pass the thread through the eye of the needle starting from the front to the back. Once you've made sure your thread is in the needle, pass the thread down the presser foot. Now you can rest your thread on the spring. Remember to leave 1 to 2 inches hanging and trim the excess. After you've finished threading, make sure to reposition the spring lever to its standard 90-degree angle. Last, take a step back and make sure that all needles appear to be threaded correctly. If they seem to be uniform, you are ready to stitch a test pattern. Thank you for watching Part 1 of the threading series. In Part 2, you will learn how to check and adjust thread tension. Stay tuned.